Welcome back to Centered. I'm Zach Bilo, the Director of Spiritual Formation at One Life, and we're excited to get into week 2 with you. As we prepare for week 2, we want to revisit the grid that we talked about last week. Again, we're going to take all of our worldview questions through this grid, and today we're going to be exploring the question, where did it all come from? We all have an answer to that question. Today we're going to see what some other people claim. And so before we do that, let's look at the grid one more time. The first thing, again, we'll put it back on the screen. When we approach this question, for each worldview, we're going to look at first the claims. What are the claims that each worldview makes when they answer the question? And then 2, what are the reasons they make such a claim? And then we can process whether we think those reasons are good or bad or other. 3, the implications. Again, when we're thinking implications, we're thinking of if this is true, then this is true. This is the idea that our beliefs don't stand alone. They have implications in all parts of our life. And then 4, actions. If this is true, what actions should it inspire? How should we live in response? And so, real quick reminder, we also have the message board that is always there, dynamic for you guys to visit and put some answers to some questions that we'll ask to just explore, see what other people are saying. And with that, we will move forward. Before we jump into the question, though, I want to just revisit the practice. So last week we had you kind of had homework or a spiritual practice, if you will. And if you didn't get a chance to explore it, you could just pause right now and just in 3 to 5 minutes, just write down your answer to how you would answer where did it all come from, and then what are your kind of hang-ups with the Christ-centered worldview's answer. So if you've explored that, maybe you know right where you stand. If not, just take a few minutes, pause, and think through those questions. Once you've done that, we are going to show you, again, we've said that each week our creative arts team has created a short film. And so we're going to go to that now. Just like last week, your participant guide has a spot for notes. Write down the things that strike you. Write down the things you disagree with or the things you might need to explore more. Just take some notes as you go, and then we'll come back together and explore it.
When you really think about it, it's astonishing. This world with its beauty and crazy amount of variety. There is so much to look at, experience, and so much to explore. I think we've all taken turns being blown away by some kind of natural wonder. Maybe it's as common as an extra special sunset on your drive home, or maybe you've taken a vacation and seen something like the Rocky Mountains. Whatever the expression, we've all experienced that sense of majesty and mystery of the world around us. And that's one reason, at some point, we all ask the first and most basic worldview question. Where did it all come from? And like other worldview questions, there's several answers to choose from. For example, many Eastern ideologies could be filed under the broad description of what's technically known as pantheistic monism. That is to say, all of reality is one impersonal, infinite element, and all of it could be collectively called God. And that means all of it has always been here, will always be here, and will continue on in a kind of eternal spiritual wheel. The materialist atheist worldview, which is popular in Western academic circles, would say it all came from something approximating nothing. That nothing includes things like quantum fields, fluctuations, vacuums, and the fundamental laws of physics, but the primary idea here is that all things came from nearly no thing at all. The Christ-centered worldview, which is the worldview we espouse, is summarized well in the words penned by the Apostle Paul in his letter to the church of the Roman town of Colossae around the year 60 AD. It's a lyrical celebration of Jesus' identity. Some scholars have suggested it may be a song known and sung by early Christians expressing all they believed Jesus to be. The first section is all about his identity as creator of all things. He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For by him all things were created, things on earth and things in heaven, visible and invisible. All things were created by him and for him. The Christian answer to where did it all come from is pretty clear-cut. All things were created by him. That single word, him, is the most basic and distinguishing marker separating the Christian answer to this most fundamental question from others. According to this early Christian document, all of creation comes from a personal and obviously powerful source. This is an important distinction, and if true, its implications are profound. A personal creator would mean that someone, a mind, a decision maker, meant for all things to be here. This is, of course, the opposite of something like an impersonal force, or impersonal laws, or elements being the source. The idea, if true, it changes everything. To appreciate the Christ-centered explanation for the question, where did it all come from, a workable, although limited metaphor, it can help. An artist. An artist, being a person with a mind, can choose to create something. And assuming this artist has the means and skills to create, he or she can produce something for any number of reasons. Their own pleasure, the pleasure of others, or reasons known only to the artist. But automatically, the work produced would distinguish itself by having meaning, because it has someone to mean it. Taking the analogy further, it's also helpful to point out that an artist is both separate from the artwork, but could possibly be revealed in the artwork. In being separate from the art, that means the artist is not dependent on the artwork in any way, nor is the artist made of the very same things the art is made of. If this hymn is true, it's accurate to say we came from an artist. But that's not even the most interesting thing about this view of the world. Later in the Christ hymn, the word reconcile is used in reference to the Creator. When you put him, a person, and the word like reconcile together, you discover the most amazing idea inside the Christ-centered view of the world. According to the early Christians, all things came from an all-powerful, all-knowing, and obviously wildly creative person with whom we can have a relationship. In short, the Christ-centered view of the world sees relationship with the Creator as the center of all things. And if true, it may explain why we have that beautiful sense of wonder that is often accompanied by the desire we have to share it with someone else.
Okay, so this will be our main question for the message board this week. The film used some words that we don't often describe in our everyday experience, words like wonder and majesty and mystery. And so the question is, when was the last time you've been hit with wonder? Where were you? What were you doing? How would you describe the experience? You know, maybe it was standing at the Grand Canyon. Maybe it was in a film. Maybe it was a photograph. You know, maybe it was seeing your kids or friends do something, you know. But when was the last time you were hit with wonder? Now, as we start to explore the question, where did it all come from, we first want to look at the claims. So we're going to go through a few different worldviews and just kind of list out what they claim is the answer to that, where did it all come from. And the first is naturalism. And we sort of talked about naturalism a little bit last week with that Alex Rosenberg quote. I don't know if you remember, the Duke University professor that sort of laid out all his answers at once. But put simply, naturalism is a philosophical viewpoint where it's pretty much just says that everything arises from natural things. It comes from atoms and molecules, and so it automatically excludes anything supernatural or anything spiritual. And so, generally speaking, that means there's no soul, no spirit, no wonder, just matter. Naturalism is generally just, you know, when you think of an atheistic worldview, that's kind of where what you're thinking of. And so, with that in mind, with that definition in mind, take a second to just think about how do you think a naturalist would answer the question, where did it all come from? And you can just jot down your answer in your participant guide. And so a naturalist would likely argue, not to overgeneralize them, but they would likely argue that everything just came from matter and arose naturally through a process of unguided evolution. That somehow the first matter formed and then the rest of the world evolved from that into what we have today. And a quick note, and hopefully this doesn't get me in trouble, but the caricature of the Christian worldview is that we believe that like evolution is from the devil and we're all against it. And just want you to know that the Christ-centered worldview actually does allow space for the idea of guided evolution, right? So when it comes to the idea of evolution, the Christ worldview doesn't have to exclude that. The problematic word isn't evolution, it's unguided evolution. The second worldview is often referred to as pantheism, and pantheism is a belief that the universe is God, and that everything in the universe is all composed of this thing that is God. And so, generally speaking, pantheism holds that the universe is divine and eternal. Not that God created the universe, but that the universe is God. And so just the same question as with naturalism, how do you think that someone with a pantheistic worldview would answer the question, where did it all come from? Just think about that for just a second, or discuss it if you're in your group. So this one is actually a little tricky to answer because you would think that the answer would be that the universe came from some kind of God, if the universe is God. But actually, the answer is that it came from nowhere because in pantheism, the universe is eternal, so it's always been here. It wasn't created. The third one is just quickly look at Islam. The way that Islam would answer the question is that they believe that God or Allah created all things. So in this way, they're monotheistic like Christianity, like the Christ-centered worldview, but there would be a sharp distinction between the way they view the inclusion of Jesus in creation. You know, the Christ-centered worldview would say that Jesus was a part of that, and Islam would not. And so just from those three claims, there's an important worldview point, and I think this is in your participant guide, but it's worth pointing out, and that's this idea of worldviews being mutually exclusive. And that means that two or more ideas can't both be true. And so when we look at even this very basic first question of where did it all come from, just in those four worldviews, we see four very different ideas on how it was created and the implications of that. And so while it feels politically correct to say like all religions are the same or all worldviews are the same, we see from just this basic question that even for the first one, from the start, they're very different. And so to say that all worldviews are the same is actually to almost like it's the most exclusive claim of all, because it's really belittling all the other worldviews, because you're saying that none of their truth is true, but you have the truth that everything's the same. And so that's just an important thing to point out when you think about worldviews. Think about how they're mutually exclusive, and that automatically removes the possibility of that whole idea of all things are true and all religions are the same. They all lead to the same place, because they all have very different answers to that. They're mutually exclusive. Okay, finally, the Christ-centered worldview. So there's a large number of texts in the Bible to illustrate the Christ-centered worldview's answer to this question. But we want to go back to the one we looked at last week, because it is believed to be one of the most earliest and most complete statements of who Jesus is. So that scholars believe that the early Jesus followers were already saying these things about Jesus right off the jump. And so we want to go back to Colossians 1, 15 through 20, and we're going to put this on the screen and read it together, and then we'll go into a series of questions. Colossians 1, 15 through 20 says, "The Son is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For in him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities, All things have been created through him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. And he's the head of the body, the church. He's the beginning and the firstborn among the dead, so that in everything he might have supremacy. For God was pleased to have all his fullness dwell in him, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether things on earth or in heaven, by making peace through his blood shed on the cross. And so I'm going to ask just a series of questions now, and we can even put them on the screen, and then you just take time. You can pause after each question and just reflect on it. If you're in a group, you can discuss together. But the first question is, when we look, again, Scripture is not just a bunch of nice sayings about God, it's making claims about reality. And so when you look at this text, how does this text answer the question, where did it all come from? So when I look at this text, I see that no matter what you believe about how it was created, whether it was in 7 literal days, whether it was guided evolutionary process, whether it was intelligent design, whether you think it was 13 billion years old or 10,000 years old, above all of that, first we see that the universe was created by a loving and personal God. And so when we see that, when we think about that, to answer that question, now process this or discuss it among your group. So using this description of the Christ-centered worldview, can you name 1 or 2 points of difference or disagreement between the Christ-centered worldview and the pantheistic or New Age worldview? So just hit pause for a minute and think about that. Think about what we said about how each of those other worldviews, what claims they make about where the question, where did it all come from, and see if you can spot any differences. So these are in your participant guide, and you can fill in the blanks there, but the Christ-centered worldview believes that the universe was created, and where we see a sharp difference in that is that with the pantheistic worldview, is the pantheistic worldview holds that the universe is eternal. So there's one first difference, and they're mutually exclusive. They can't both be true. The Christ-centered worldview believes the universe was created. Pantheism holds the universe is eternal. Second, the Christ-centered worldview believes that this creator is a personal God, and pantheism holds that the whole universe is this sort of divine, impersonal creator. And so that's a very big difference, having a personal God that knows and cares about people and an impersonal God. And then what about naturalism? Where does naturalism and the Christ-centered worldview different? Well, at the most basic point, naturalism or materialists would not agree that the world had any kind of creator, personal or otherwise. So those are the claims. And now we want to move to the second part of the grid, which is reasons. Why do we, specifically, why does the Christ-centered worldview make the claims that it does? And so when we think about belief, one of the images we like to use is the image of a scale, right? We all have doubts, and some of that's healthy and good, and we all have reasons why we believe. And on this scale is sort of this weighing out this balance of doubts and reasons to believe. And it's important. It's an important part of the spiritual journey to sort of live in that tension and not just try to resolve all of these doubts immediately, but that we kind of manage this balancing act as we process things. If we want to have these sort of full worldviews where we are consistently and living, it's okay to live in that tension and not just demand that all your questions be answered. And so we want to just try for a few minutes to add some weight to the belief side of the scale. We all have our reasons for doubt, but we just want to give 3 basic arguments. And I'm really going to have to go super brief in most of these and just look at one in particular at the end. But we'll look at 3 things now. And the first, it's just this idea of mind. When we ask the question, where did it all come from? Because the naturalist would claim that it just came from an accidental, collision of atoms or something like that. But the Christ-centered worldview believes that mind came before matter. Matter cannot create mind. So just, again, just take a minute and think about that. Mind came before matter. Matter can't create mind. And so a real simple analogy of that is I have kids, and if they play Legos, and if I walk into the room and Legos are scattered all over the floor, I'm pretty sure that Jude, my 2-year-old, came in and dumped all the Legos out. But if I come in and there is something built, I'm pretty sure that something created that Jude didn't dump out the Legos and they formed that. But this idea that minds can rearrange matter to create something. And it's hard to imagine. So we know that minds can arrange things, but it's hard to imagine that matter, that Legos could start there and then create something that had minds. I know it's kind of a complicated thought, but just explore that a little bit more, this idea that mind came before matter. And we'll have more in additional resources at the end. The second thing is just, some call it the fine-tuning argument, but basically it's just the comprehensibility of the universe. And we're going to throw a quote up from Albert Einstein. This is from 1936 in a science journal. He wrote that the mystery of the world, the eternal mystery of the world, is its comprehensibility. The fact that the fact that it is comprehensive is a miracle. And in similar fashion, Sir Fred Hoyle, he was a 19th century British mathematician and astronomer, and he was an atheist at the time, but he ended up being a agnostic, which is just this idea that he believes there's something there's some kind of creator, but that he can't know who it is. But in his work on mathematics, he calculated the chances of life originating on this planet. Again, this is the idea of the Lego blocks actually coming together to form a universe. And he calculated the numbers as 1 in the 10 to the 40th thousandth possibilities. And that number is just like it's so large it's almost meaningless. But where it really stands out is when you realize the fact that the entire estimated number of atoms in the universe is 1 in 10 to the 80th. So it's this huge discrepancy even between the number of atoms in the universe and the possibility of it forming out of nothing. Again, he said it was 1 in 10 to the 40th thousandth power. And as he was turning towards the end of his career, again, he was an atheist and trying to prove that God wasn't real, that there was no need for a creator. He flipped, and towards the end of his career, he wrote this. And this will be on your screen as well. He's saying, when you look at the data, when you look at everything, would you not say to yourself, a common sense interpretation of the facts suggests that a super intellect has monkeyed with physics as well as with chemistry and biology, and there are no blind forces worth speaking about in nature. The numbers one calculates from the facts seems to me so overwhelming as to put this conclusion beyond question. So he's just saying this is a mathematician looking at his work over his lifetime and saying, when I look back on it and I've done the math and I just can't see, if I'm just using common sense, I can't see, based on all the data that we have, how it could be anything that overwhelmingly points to a creator. And so again, this is not conclusive evidence. This is putting weight on the scale of belief. All of these arguments, there is no one and done argument when it comes to belief in God. It's we process a number of things, and as we compare the total picture, it points us to belief or unbelief. And so the third and final one that we want to talk about is known as the cosmological argument. And so when we go back and look at how some of the other worldviews claimed about the answer to this question, we said that pantheists believed that the universe was eternal, and we said that naturalists believed, counter to what Fred Hoyle's math would say, that there is no creator at all and that the universe just arose from natural causes. So keeping those in mind, we want to go to show you a video now, not one that we created, but one that is just really good from Reasonable Faith out there, and it talks about the cosmological argument, and I think that's going to help us just look at this a bit further. So we're going to watch the cosmological argument now, and then we'll discuss a little more.
Does God exist? Or is the material universe all that is, or ever was, or ever will be? One approach to answering this question is the cosmological argument. It goes like this: whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore, the universe has a cause. Is the first premise true? Let's consider. Believing that something can pop into existence without a cause is more of a stretch than believing in magic. At least with magic, you've got a hat and a magician. And if something can come into being from nothing, then why don't we see this happening all the time? No, everyday experience and scientific evidence confirm our first premise. If something begins to exist, it must have a cause. But what about our second premise? Did the universe begin, or has it always existed? Atheists have typically said that the universe has been here forever. The universe is just there, and that's all. First, let's consider the second law of thermodynamics. It tells us the universe is slowly running out of usable energy, and that's the point. If the universe had been here forever, it would have run out of usable energy by now. The second law points us to a universe that has a definite beginning. This is further confirmed by a series of remarkable scientific discoveries. In 1915, Albert Einstein presented his general theory of relativity. This allowed us, for the first time, to talk meaningfully about the past history of the universe. Next, Alexander Friedmann and George Lemaitre, each working with Einstein's equations, predicted that the universe is expanding. Then in 1929, Edwin Hubble measured the red shift in light from distant galaxies. This empirical evidence confirmed not only that the universe is expanding, but that it sprang into being from a single point in the finite past. It was a monumental discovery, almost beyond comprehension. However, not everyone is fond of a finite universe, so it wasn't long before alternative models popped into existence. But one by one, these models failed to stand the test of time. More recently, three leading cosmologists, Arvin Bord, Alan Guth, and Alexander Vilenkin, prove that any universe which has on average been expanding throughout its history cannot be eternal in the past, but must have an absolute beginning. This even applies to the multiverse, if there is such a thing. This means that scientists can no longer hide behind a past eternal universe. There is no escape. They have to face the problem of a cosmic beginning. Any adequate model must have a beginning, just like the standard model. It's quite plausible then that both premises of the argument are true. This means that the conclusion is also true. The universe has a cause. And since the universe can't cause itself, its cause must be beyond the space-time universe. It must be spaceless, timeless, immaterial, uncaused, and unimaginably powerful, much like God. The cosmological argument shows that, in fact, it is quite reasonable to believe that God does exist.
We hope you enjoyed that video from Dr. Craig and from Reasonable Faith. He made some great points in there, so I don't feel like I need to summarize. You guys can process those more and more as you go. That's a great resource to visit anytime for some of these questions. But one thing that is worth thinking about in light of what the arguments that he was making in the video is how does that impact some of the claims of pantheism and naturalism? Because if you remember, one of the main claims of where did it come from in pantheism is that the universe is eternal. And Dr. Craig spoke directly to that. And then one of the claims of naturalism the universe formed naturally without an outside cause, and he addressed that too with the cosmological argument. And so again, as we just process these worldviews, the grid helps us look at them and actually evaluate the claims of them and the evidence. And so one point of note in light of the answers to these questions and scientific evidence and all that, I just remember as a kid hearing conversations in my own church about being against the Big Bang, and I couldn't figure out why, because to me it seemed like it pointed straight to Genesis 1. But we have to be careful not to sort of throw all our chips in for some model of the universe or some model of creation. And a good way to approach it is just to see how God fits into each, because right now it is the Big Bang theory is sort of the common one among people. But there may be something that pops up like the multi-universe theory. Something else might come up, and at times during church history we have held tightly to beliefs that we didn't have to hold tightly to, like the Earth-centered universe and things like that. And so the thing to remember is that all truth is God's truth. And so as we let knowledge unfold, that will prove to be God's truth as well. And so whether it's whatever the next thing is, if it's true, there will be room for God. And I think that's just an important thing for us to remember, not to just double down on some particular theory. Next, we want to look at the implications. And so we've examined the claims around the question, where does it all come from? We've examined the evidence, and now we have to ask about the implications. If this is true, then this, right? And so to kick that off, we're going to throw a quote up from J.R. Tolkien, who is the Lord of the Rings guy, among other things. But he says this, and I think it's a good question to pause and think about. If you do not believe in a personal God, the question, what is the purpose of life, is unaskable and unanswerable. And so if you're in a group, just take a few minutes to discuss that. What does he mean by that? Do you agree with it? And what does it have to do with some of these other worldviews? So again, if you're by yourself, just hit pause, and just take time to think through that. And if you are in a group, take time to discuss this. So what we see is that Tolkien is suggesting, and rightly suggesting, that one of the implications of an impersonal God, which is, remember, pantheism held that, is that we can't know the purpose of life and creation, which means that for pantheism, the universe is somewhat unknowable. And in similar fashion, if everything came from unguided natural processes like matter and electrons and atoms and chemicals all smashing together, what are the implications for that when it comes to meaning and purpose and hope and life after death, things like that? Again, just process that for a minute. Because if all that exists is matter and molecules and atoms smashing together, then humans are nothing but an accident at best and a mistake at worst. And so the implications of that belief is that humans don't have any inherent meaning or purpose or hope. Even more, things like the film describe, things like love and wonder, things like just all of those sort of big feelings that we have towards the world, that's nothing more than chemical smashing around in our brain, right? It's not, they're illusory. They're not real. And so that's what a consistent naturalist would say, that you're not really having an experience of awe or wonder or beauty or love. It's just simply chemicals swirling around in our head. And so we have to consider those implications when we process this. And so then when we think of the Christ-centered worldview, what are the implications if the answer to where did it all come from is that it came from an artist-like, powerful and personal creator? that has implications of its own. It does have implications of meaning and purpose and value and inherent worth. So as we process these questions, we just think through the implications and which one points to the truth. So finally, the last thing on the grid is action. And so let's just, even for a moment, just as a hypothetical, assume that the Christ hymn that we read in Colossians is an accurate picture of reality. So spend some time reflecting on how that should change the way we live in the world around us. If the Christ-centered worldview is true, if it all came from an artist-like, powerful, personal God, how should we live in response to that? And then a final question is, think about what you value in life. And a lot of us, I think, would say love and all of that. And when we think about how worldviews inspire actions, ask yourself which worldview is most consistent with an ethic of love. And I think you'll see that some of the worldviews that we're exploring, this idea of this ethic of love doesn't make consistent sense with. Okay, so again, just like last week, we want to send you off with some homework or some more of a spiritual practice, and we're going to put it up on screen. This week's practice is simply, in light of the film we just watched earlier, is to look for wonder. It says we all get stuck in those daily routines, and at times it's hard for us to see beyond the mundane. So this week, be on the lookout for wonder. Take a photo with your phone or something of something that sparks a sense of wonder or awe. It could be something big or small, maybe even seeing something mundane in a new way. And then if you want, you can go and share your photo on the message board throughout the week. But we look forward to seeing you again next week, where we explore our next worldview question.